Hey there, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've got a stack of sources pulled together for you today, really zeroing in on a topic that, lives in the headlines, but also in the often hidden world of government operations. Catching people on the run. We're talking fugitive manhunts.
That's right. And it's kind of two sides of the same coin, isn't it? On one hand, you get these really dramatic, high-profile cases that everyone hears about. Think, that intense search for the escapee out of Pennsylvania recently.
Right.
But then on the other hand, there's let's say, the persistent grinding work of government agencies tracking down a much larger, less visible group of fugitives, people with outstanding orders to be removed from the country.
So our mission in this deep dive is to try and understand both sides. We'll look at the specifics of a couple of those intense, boots-on-the-ground manhunts.
Yeah, the ones that grab the news.
Exactly. And then we're going to pull back the curtain a bit using this pretty in-depth government report from 2006. It gives us a look inside the systemic challenges faced by agencies like ICE, the ones dedicated to finding fugitives with those removal orders.
It's a way for you to get quickly informed on a subject that's pretty compelling, really. Blending those edge-of-your-seat moments with some insights into the surprisingly persistent challenges faced by the systems designed to keep track of people.
Okay, let's unpack this. Maybe we start with one of those dramatic cases, the one that really gripped Pennsylvania and, frankly, the national news, late summer 2023. The escape and capture of Danelo Cavalcante from Chester County Prison. That one felt like something out of a movie.
It truly did, and the escape itself was just so audacious, almost unbelievable, really. Cavalcante, who'd just been convicted of, fatally stabbing his ex-girlfriend 38 times in front of her kids.
Horrific.
And he was wanted in Brazil for homicide, too. He basically got out by crab walking up a narrow wall in the exercise yard.
Crab walking.
Yeah.
So using his hands and feet against the opposing walls, like chimneying up.
Exactly that. Scaling it horizontally almost. Then he got past razor wire, ran across a roof, scaled another fence, more razor wire.
And they caught it on video later, didn't they? Which just made it seem even crazier.
Oh, yeah. And that kicked off this massive 2-week manhunt across a huge rural area. 759 square miles in Chester County?
Wow.
You can imagine the immediate impact on the community living there.
Oh, absolutely. Families must have been terrified. Longwood Gardens closed down. Residents told all this. Lock everything, check their cars, check their sheds. The fear was palpable because, the sources described him as extremely dangerous.
And extremely cagey, having nothing to lose.
Yeah.
That combination is chilling.
Yeah.
And his time on the run, it showed he was actively trying to evade them. He changed his appearance, shaved his face, got new clothes somewhere, ditched items. He managed to stay within that initial search area for quite a while.
But things escalated significantly, didn't they? There was that attempted burglary where a homeowner actually confronted someone matching his description.
Right. And then, even more concerning, he managed to steal a .22 caliber rifle with a scope and a flashlight. That happened after another confrontation where the homeowner actually fired shots at him.
So now he's armed.
Exactly. That raised the stakes considerably. The search effort was already huge. Hundreds of police, canine units, helicopters, drones.
They're even playing a message from his mother, right, in Portuguese. From helicopters and cars, trying to get him to surrender.
Yeah, urging him to give up. It was just this intense, all-hands-on-deck effort.
So the capture, September 13th, how did that finally go down?
Well, it started with a burglar alarm, actually, near midnight. That drew teams into a specific area. Then lightning storms grounded the aircraft, which you'd think would be bad.
Yeah, hampers the search.
But it actually helped keep the tactical perimeter tight on the ground. And then just before it had to land because of the storm, a DEA plane picked up a heat signal.
Ah, okay, so they had a location.
Which allowed the tactical teams to converge. And what stood out to me was the description from LTO George Bivens. He said they surrounded him really quietly in the thick underbrush around 8 a.m. Cavalcante didn't even realize they were there until they were right on top of him. He was trying to crawl away.
That element of surprise was key then.
Absolutely. It's just a dramatic example of the resources the coordination needed for one of these high-stakes contained searches. But, the sources remind us Cavalcante isn't some isolated incident. We've seen other dramatic escapes recently.
That's true, like Cesar Hernandez in California, December 2024.
Yeah.
Already serving 80 to life for murder.
Yeah, and he escaped from a transport ban on the way to court. Just jumped out.
Unbelievable. Put the whole town of Delano on edge, closed schools, messed up Christmas events. Officials later thought he probably got out of the immediate area pretty quickly.
Or Grant Hardin in Arkansas, May 2025, an ex-police chief convicted of rape and murder.
Right, escaped from a state prison unit. Big guy, described as 6 foot, 259 pounds. Sparked a multi-agency manhunt in rough terrain. Citizens warned again, be vigilant.
And then Ramon Jamar Alston in North Carolina, also May 2025, serving life for murder, the Christmas Day killer, they called him.
He escaped from guards while being transported to a hospital. And the sheriff knew him personally, warned he was extremely cagey, extremely dangerous, and had nothing to lose.
Yeah, and the detail about what he was last seen wearing, gray t-shirt, brown pants, white New Balance shoes, and handcuffs connected to a belly chain. That paints a picture.
It really does. And we also had those two men, Amin Hurst and Nasser Grant, who escaped from that Philly Correctional Center, though they were later recaptured.
Right. So these stories, they really show you the immediate, palpable impact on communities and the sheer scale of resources, personnel, air support, tech that gets poured into finding these individuals when they become that kind of high-profile threat.
It definitely makes you think, though, what about the thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who are technically fugitives but aren't recent violent prison escapees? How does the system handle them?
And that's exactly where the second part of our deep dive comes in. We need to step away from the dramatic individual chases for a moment and look at the broader, often less visible, government efforts. Which brings us to this Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General report from 2006. It focused specifically on ICE's fugitive operations teams.
Okay, so this report gives us a look inside the system, a system designed to track a different kind of fugitive population, what the report calls fugitive aliens.
Exactly. These are individuals who have been issued final orders of removal, meaning they're supposed to leave the country, but they haven't left and the orders haven't been carried out for whatever reason.
And this program, it actually started under the old INS, right? Back in 2002.
Yeah, then absorbed by ICE when DHS was formed in 2003. Its explicit purpose, stated right in the report, was to identify, locate, apprehend, and remove this specific population. The ultimate goal, eliminate the backlog.
And the scale of that challenge, even back in 2006, it was enormous, wasn't it?
Huge. As of August 2006, the report says ICE estimated over 623,000 fugitive aliens in the U.S.
Over 600,000.
Yeah, which was roughly, 5.4% of the estimated undocumented population at that time? A massive number.
And ICE did invest in trying to tackle this, didn't they? The report mentions funding.
They did. Over $204 million allocated between fiscal years 2003 and 2006 just to deploy these specialized teams. By October 2006, they had 50 teams operational across the country.
And these teams had a specific structure, ideally.
Right. The report details the ideal setup. Typically 7 members, you'd have 4 deportation officers, a supervisory deportation officer, an immigration enforcement agent, and a deportation assistant, each with specific roles identifying, locating, apprehending, transporting, admin, all that.
Okay. But the report also noted that the goals for these teams kept shifting, right? Sometimes it was about numbers, other times about prioritizing criminals.
Yeah, the apprehension goals or priorities changed a few times over the years, the report covered. Sometimes focusing on sheer numbers, other times, like in January 2006, shifting to prioritize criminal and higher threat fugitives. But a key point the report makes is that it was actually hard to tell if these goals were even being met.
Because of reporting issues.
Partly, yeah. But that brings us to what the report really uncovered, the big factors that were limiting how effective these teams could be. And maybe the most surprising thing, the backlog of fugitive aliens was actually increasing each year from 2002 to 2006, even with these teams deployed.
Increasing, despite the money in the teams. So what was going wrong? What was the first major hurdle the report pointed out?
Information. Or, maybe better put, the lack of reliable information. The main database they use, the Deportable Alien Control System, DCS, it was a huge problem.
How so?
Well, its accuracy and completeness were really questioned. An analyst quoted in the report estimated it was only about 50% accurate, and maybe more incomplete than inaccurate even.
Only 50% accurate. Wow. So they're trying to find specific people, and half the time the information they start with might be wrong or just missing.
Exactly. Or outdated. And the report explained why it was so hard to keep it updated. You had these incredibly high case-to-officer ratios.
Like the example they gave for New York City.
Yeah, New York City had something like 200,000 cases in the system and only 10 officers trying to manage them. It's just overwhelming.
You can't possibly keep track accurately under those conditions.
Right. They were basically drowning in paperwork and data entry needs, even with mandates trying to improve it. And the replacement system they had planned, the enforce removals module, it hadn't even been implemented by the time the OIG finished their field work in August 2006.
Okay, so bad data was problem one. What was another big challenge? The report mentioned bed space.
Yes. Or rather, the lack of it. This seems like such a fundamental bottleneck, doesn't it?
You'd think so. You catch someone, you need somewhere to put them.
But there simply weren't enough detention facility beds. Not in the government's own service processing centers, not in the contract detention facilities, not even using beds in local or county jails.
And this had a real impact on operations.
A direct impact. The report gives specific examples. Teams literally had to stop making apprehensions, sometimes for weeks at a time. Why? Because there was nowhere to house the people they caught. Field office directors were telling teams to slow down or halt operations because all their beds were full.
That's counterproductive, to say the least.
Massively. And think about the consequence. If you can't detain someone you apprehend, especially if they're not deemed a high flight risk or danger, they might have to be released, maybe under supervision, but still released.
Which, as the report noted, kind of undercuts the productivity and the whole point of apprehending them in the first place.
Exactly. It counteracts any deterrence effect. You catch them, but then you might have to let them go because there's no room.
Okay, so data issues, bed space issues, what else? There was something about the team's actual workspace.
Yeah, this one seems almost unbelievable given the nature of the work they're doing. Inadequate workspace for the teams themselves.
What do you mean, like small offices?
Worse than that sometimes. The report details these anecdotes, like a team being authorized and even staffed, but it couldn't actually be established because there was no building or office space available for them.
Seriously.
Or teams operating out of incredibly cramped conditions. One example was 5 officers crammed into a space designed for 2. Others worked out of airport terminals initially. One team ended up in a tiny room, a converted detention cell, actually, only 12 by 15 feet. Officers had to share desks or just sit at tables pushed together.
Wow. Trying to run complex investigations, handle sensitive information, coordinate operations from a converted jail cell.
It really highlights a potential mismatch in resource allocation, doesn't it? Especially when you compare it to the immediate high-profile needs of something like the Cavalcante manhunt.
Definitely. And compounding these resource issues, there was another problem mentioned. Team members getting pulled away to do other things.
Right. Even though the official policy, the memos, said these fugitive operations teams should only handle fugitive operations, that wasn't the reality on the ground.
So what else were they doing?
All sorts of things. Managing non-detained docket cases, doing escorts, court details, consular liaison work, sometimes specialized roles like juvenile coordinator, which needed specific training other officers didn't have, or acting as firearms instructors.
That sounds time-consuming.
It was. The report mentioned one instance where transporting special interest aliens or criminal defendants was taking up 2 days a week for a team member. Firearms instruction could take significant time, too.
So the teams dedicated to this very specific, very important mission, they weren't actually able to dedicate 100% of their time to it.
Pretty much.
Right.
The OIG recommended either making sure assignments actually matched the policy, or if that wasn't feasible, changing the policy to reflect reality, and maybe training non-team members to handle some of those other duties.
Okay, next hurdle. Reporting inaccuracies. We touched on this, but how bad was it? How could they even tell if the teams were being effective if the numbers weren't reliable?
That was exactly the problem. The apprehension reports just weren't a clean reflection of what the teams were doing. They lumped together arrests made by the fugitive ops teams and arrests made by other non-team officers.
Okay, so inflating the team numbers.
Right. Plus, they included arrests made by other agencies entirely. Initially, they even counted things called detainers, which are basically just requests for another agency to notify ICE, not actual custody transfers.
That's definitely not an apprehension.
Not at all. And sometimes they even counted case closures as apprehensions, like if the alien died or left the country on their own or got legal status.
So the numbers looked better, but didn't reflect actual fugitive arrests by the dedicated teams.
Exactly. It made it almost impossible to accurately assess the team's productivity or figure out if they were meeting those shifting goals we talked about. The report did note a new management system, the Fugitive Case Management System, was starting up in June 2006, supposed to improve tracking. But the OIG couldn't say yet if it was working.
Makes sense. And finally, even when they did successfully apprehend a fugitive alien, the process wasn't over, was it? There were challenges to actually removing them.
Big challenges, and often these were factors completely outside of ICE's control.
Like what?
Well, dealing with foreign governments, for one. Consulates or embassies sometimes delayed or just refused to issue the travel documents needed to send someone back.
Diplomatic hurdles.
Right. And then there were decisions made within the U.S. legal system by immigration courts or federal courts, things like grants of relief from removal, stays of removal, motions to reopen cases.
So someone could be apprehended, but then a court decision could stop the removal.
Exactly. And if their status legally changed because of one of those decisions, they weren't technically a fugitive anymore. That case should have been closed, but sometimes it might have looked like an apprehended fugitive who just wasn't removed. The report actually pointed out that they couldn't even determine the percentage of apprehended fugitives who were actually removed because the removal data didn't distinguish between fugitives and non-fugitives caught in other ways.
So, okay, let's recap these challenges from the 2006 report. You've got bad data making it hard to even find people. You don't have enough beds to hold them if you do find them. You might not even have adequate office space for the teams trying to find them. The team members are getting pulled off task. The reporting metrics are murky. And even if you overcome all that, external factors can prevent the final removal.
That's a pretty good summary. And when you put all those pieces together, you start to see why that backlog of fugitive aliens wasn't shrinking back then. It was actually growing year after year. It wasn't just about the difficulty of the chase. It was about the entire system being hampered by these fundamental issues.
It really paints a picture of systemic challenges, doesn't it? Less about the dramatic manhunt and more about basic things like resource allocation, information management, bureaucratic hurdles.
Exactly. The report did also touch briefly on how IC was trying to coordinate and support these teams, though.
Right. They worked with other agencies, federal, state, local, usually informing them of operations, sometimes getting backup, often just asking for a uniform presence for safety.
And in some places, they were formalizing cooperation by setting up joint fugitive task forces. There were also a couple of dedicated SIPRET units being established.
Yeah, one was a fugitive case management unit out in California, started in 2004. It processed leads from all sorts of agencies, USCIS, State Department, Labor, TSA, ICHQ itself, consolidated the info and sent out lead lists to the field offices.
Right, prioritizing them. Hot leads needed a 7-day response, criminal leads 30 days, non-criminal 180 days, trying to bring some order to the incoming information.
And then there was a Fugitive Operations Support Center set up in Vermont, operational around June 2006. Its goals were broader, improving that dossier's data integrity, developing leads, supporting field ops, even developing major operations. They were using contractors to help process data from agreements with other agencies.
But the OIG found that while ICE said they had agreements with lots of agencies, like 330 of them.
Wow.
Yeah, but it wasn't clear how many of those agreements specifically related to fugitive aliens. And more importantly, regular data exchange and reconciliation, checking their lists against other agencies' lists, just wasn't happening systematically. Officers often had to just search multiple databases manually, one by one.
So the potential was there, but the execution wasn't quite matching up yet.
Kind of. The OIG encouraged them to keep trying, but recommended negotiating better, more specific agreements and actually providing the resources needed to do that regular data reconciliation.
Makes sense. The report also mentioned training, didn't it, briefly?
It did. Specific training had been part of earlier initiatives. The OIG just recommended that ICE assess the current training needs and maybe think about developing a refresher course for the teams.
And ICE agreed.
Yeah, ICE concurred in their response to the report. They said they were reviewing the curriculum and planning to propose a refresher course back then in August 2006.
Okay, so when we bring all of this back to you, our listener, what's the big takeaway here?
Well, I think it really highlights this fascinating duality in the world of fugitive apprehension. You've got these incredibly intense, headline-grabbing manhunts for individuals like Cavalcante, massive resources mobilized, concentrated effort, critical threat, immediate community impact, very dramatic, very high stakes.
Right, the kind of thing that makes the news.
Yeah.
But then you have this other side, revealed by that 2006 report, the persistent, maybe more grinding challenge of tracking a much, much larger population of fugitives, those with unexecuted removal orders.
And that system, at least back then, was facing these fundamental, often hidden logistical and bureaucratic hurdles. Problems with data integrity, with physical space, not enough beds, not even enough decent office space. Problems with keeping specialized teams focused solely on their mission. Problems with murky reporting and with all those external factors that could impede a final removal.
So finding and apprehending fugitives, whether dangerous escapees or people with final removal orders, it clearly involves moments of high drama and intense effort.
But it's also underpinned by these ongoing significant challenges related to really basic stuff. Resource management, information sharing, staffing focus, and navigating complex legal and diplomatic processes.
And this report, it's a snapshot from, well, over a decade ago now. It detailed systemic challenges that were actively preventing ICE from reducing that fugitive alien backlog at the time.
So thinking about that, and then thinking about the high-profile escapes we still see happening more recently, what does this ongoing challenge really tell us? Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Does it highlight some fundamental difficulties in just tracking people in a large, dynamic society like ours? What does it reveal about how we balance security measures, resource allocation, and the sheer complexity of these government systems?
And maybe how much have those specific challenges outlined back in 2006, the data issues, the lack of beds and workspace, the diffuse focus, how much of those things changed or maybe persisted in the years since?
Definitely something worth thinking about as you go about your day. Thanks for diving in with us today.